Good evening.
Good evening.
You are live here with Courtside with Lawman,
And Carmen B.
and we are here to talk about criminal justice and the issues that affect the public.
And affect the world tonight.
Yes,
So we always label it. Tonight we were talking about some court decisions. We're going to talk a little bit about racial disparity, of course. And we hope to talk a little bit about funding or defunding the police. We've seen that our president actually has made a statement about defunding police, and it was done in a way to where I think he was trying to gather support and whatnot with people. But we got to talk about what he means by that. So we're going to start off with, though, first talking about some court decisions of note. Now, the first one, just real briefly, is that I
well,
learned.
before we get to that, we want to remind viewers that
Oh,
you
yes,
can
true.
call in. You can call in at 916-443-5288 with your questions and your comments. You can also post in the chat and we will read your questions and your comments. We would like to remind you that if you have a question and Lawman or myself, Carmen B, answers that question for you, it does not create an attorney-client relationship. We are an educational and informational program. We want to educate the public.
Correct. And so now let's get started. First, we were talking about court decisions. Now, one decision that I know was in the news was there was an incident, I believe it was in Florida, where a black man was in charge of a mentally ill patient. And that patient and the black man found themselves facing law enforcement in the middle of the street and in sort of a standoff in a way. However, the black man and the patient did not have a gun.
And the black man, to be clear, was a caretaker,
Taker
a provider of services
to the patient.
for the patient.
Correct. And one officer shot the black man, did not kill him, but charges were filed and he was convicted. And I learned, and I think in the last week and a half, that they overturned that conviction for some reason. Now, I'm not really sure on the facts of that case. But once again, what it does is it's showing us that since George Floyd, we've seen a lot of litigation now against police officers. And what we've got to know is that it is very difficult to bring these matters in court, difficult for prosecutors to gain convictions. The high profile ones we see, and they get convictions, and we're usually satisfied with those. But we've got to remember that every day that shootings go down, things go on, and there is hardly any justice, at least apparently and on the surface, for individuals involved.
And to be clear, regarding that case, I think that the officer actually fired his weapon either at the autistic man and the caregiver. I don't believe he struck either of them, but then I believe that he also physically struck the caregiver. Now, he was charged um, and he was convicted of culpable negligence in, as a result of that incident. He was convicted in 2019. He had been charged with manslaughter, but he was or attempted manslaughter, but he was acquitted of the attempted manslaughter charges. His sentence for that culpable negligence was he was sentenced to 100 hours of community service, which is volunteer service, volunteer hours that you can complete through a Red
Nonprofit.
Cross
Yeah.
or some other nonprofit. And he was ordered to write an essay on communication and weapons discharges. When is the last time that you had a client who was charged with attempted manslaughter, whose punishment, if he was convicted of something lesser, just basically involved him writing a paragraph and doing some community service?
That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Um, it ties right in with a second case that we want to talk about. And we all know about the facts about regarding Brianna and what happened to her and the failure or not failure of the AG's office to levy charges to the rightful individuals. But there was action going on in that particular case. So I believe there, Karin, what happened was
Um, he was not charged with anything that happened to Breonna Taylor, but he was charged, I believe, with reckless discharge of a firearm
right.
because of the fact that the bullets from his gun went into an apartment behind Miss Taylor's apartment, where I believe a pregnant woman, a child, and her spouse or boyfriend were sleeping. And apparently, the bullets went very near to where they were sleeping.
So sort of a negligence in a lot of ways also in terms of the discharge of the weapon.
In many ways, because my understanding is that this officer had not been on scene, or had not been a part of the planning that the officers did when planning such a raid, such as knowing the layout, the diagram of the apartments nearby. Um, and he just kind of, it sounds like, showed up blindly and was like, hey, you guys gonna do some
Not
raids tonight?
notice?
I want
Yeah.
to join in.
So I think what has happened is that did they just acquit him of everything, Carm? I
I
think
believe that they did.
so. That
I don't
means
believe he was convicted of anything.
he definitely avoided any kind of criminal charges, even on a negligence standard and basis. So what we're continuing to see is decisions from juries that will allow officers to commit negligent acts, but yet not be punished criminally for that. Now, civilly, could they be punished?
Well, not really punished. You're not really punished in a civil trial. It's monetary damages that someone is getting. And usually, when it's an officer, even if the officer is found to be in some way civilly liable, the money is not going to come from his pocket.
Correct.
It's going to come from the agency, the county, the city.
Exactly. And they probably do have funds available that grow interest on an annual basis to pay out these
They
things.
have insurance for those types of events.
Exactly. So now we got to move into um, another subject. Okay. Now, this time, I think, Carm, what are we going to start with here? Should we start with our president and what he has said at this um, State of the Union address that was given the other day?
Well,
Tell us, what do you think? What do you think about what he said?
I
First of all,
didn't hear him say very much regarding any of his promises to the African American citizens of this country. Um, I did hear him, and as we know, one of the big issues that we have is regarding right now Republicans and their attempts to find ways to make it harder for African Americans and other minorities to vote.
definitely.
So I did hear him mention about, we need to get voting rights passed and we need to deal with those issues. But another big issue for the African American community is law enforcement, and how law enforcement has become these sort of militarized um, groups, agencies that terrorize um, poor neighborhoods.
And a lot of it, I think, is also economic too. You know, in a way, it's ironic because you are going after individuals who probably don't have the most money to pay fines, but they can pay time. And that means bodies off the street, bodies away from the families, and things like that.
That means basically the equivalent of free labor for the prison industrial complex.
Right, which we know goes way back to the 1900s and so, and the peonage times and things like that. So it's a historical mark of what we're talking about, of how you get free labor through incarceration. Now, one of the things that he did say is that he doesn't want to defund the police; he wants to fund the police, and he got a great rising roar crowd, and applaud for saying that. And I don't know if he went into a full explanation of what he means, but I think his policies in the past have been that we need to spend more money because we need to make sure that police officers are trained properly before we put them out on the street. Because one of the issues that we've seen come up is the militarization of police departments. The the dress, the equipment, the armory, the weaponry that they have now can do real damage in neighborhoods. And we've seen an attitude somewhat that people feel that defunding police means to get rid of police. And I think to make that logical jump would be wrong. And I think what he was trying to do was to say, look, my defund ideas just mean retraining, putting better officers on the street. Now, my thought on training, look, we've probably been thinking about how to train police officers for years. That's I believe that has probably been there for quite a long time. One of the things that if we're going to put more funds into that, then we probably should have some well thought out plans on how that is actually going to affect change. Because you spend a lot of money on training, and the training will mean nothing when they're out there on the street acting. So, how will that training force any kind of change in a police department? Is what probably the focus has to be. I mean, you got any thoughts on that, Carmen? How is that training going to change anything?
First, I want to say that the policy, um, I don't want to call it a policy, the call for the defunding of police, I think that that has been extremely distorted. It has been portrayed as saying there won't be any police forces at all and there'll just be complete chaos in the streets, and those who wish to do harm to others would be able to do so without impunity.
Right.
That is not what that means at all. What it truly means is that law enforcement does not need to be funded in communities better than the schools are funded. It does not need to be funded better than the housing programs and job training programs are funded. It does not need to be funded as if it is its own military keeping control of a rogue force in a small country, meaning a neighborhood. There is no reason for law enforcement to have tanks. There is no need for law enforcement to have many of the kinds of weaponry that they have, because they are not dealing with war situations. Now, someone may say, well, once in a while, there might be an incident that requires them to have a tank because there's one person who's holed up in a house and they have hostages and the officers need to use the tank to, I don't know,
Would that be
knock
similar
the
to
house
the
down.
church incident that occurred near Arden,
N-
or something
No,
like that?
no, we'll talk about that
Okay.
in a minute. Well, they have armored vehicles. Let's be clear. They don't need a tank. They have armored vehicles that the SWAT team uses. So if they
Exactly.
need an armored vehicle for the protection of the officers, those they're more like
Troop carriers.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're more like van type
exactly.
truck type vehicles. Those are available. And if there is a specific instance where it's some unique circumstance and a tank is the item that is needed, that is why each state has a national guard. and the National Guard can be called in to deal with a unique issue that is requiring a tank.
In fact, the National Guard was called out when they were doing protests here downtown Sacramento
The
during
National
that
Guard
time
was
period.
called out to deal with that, but I don't know where the National Guard was. Why? Let me say this, because certainly as a former member of the National Guard, I respect the men who serve in our armed forces and in our state National Guards. But they weren't called up during the January 6th incident.
True.
They weren't called up until after the incident. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't be calling it an incident. It was an
Insurrection.
all
Yeah.
out insurrection,
Yes.
wild riot,
Coup.
an attack on our nation's capital, an attempt at a coup.
Right.
Far more dangerous behavior than what you ever saw in any of the peaceful protest marches by groups like Black Lives Matter.
Or any of them across the world that we saw. So, so back to the funding part. So you're saying basically, look, um,
I
it's
think he
no
was
need. Yeah,
pandering.
yeah.
I think he was pandering. I think President Biden was pandering to um, members of who are conservative, um, of the Republican Party, to try and convince them that, hey, I know these people over here were talking about changing things with law enforcement.
Right.
Don't worry, on my watch, nothing's going to change.
Exactly.
The thing that we really want to change is law enforcement to stop killing us, to stop killing our sons, to stop making mothers have to worry every time their son or daughter leaves the house, that if they have an encounter with law enforcement, that they won't return. And
True.
that is a greater worry for African Americans than for other Americans who have when they have encounters with law enforcement, they are much more likely to be able to survive those encounters, even where a weapon is present.
But do you think training, and what kind of training, will actually assist in that? Because if you're going to fund them with more money, where is that money to be spent? Psych training, psych evaluations. I mean,
Well, I'm not requesting additional funding. Again, I believe there are other areas that need to be funded that will actually really result in a reduction in crime.
so maybe we shift money somewhere in the unit itself, in the funding that we give now, and more of it is shifted towards some sort of training. Because I mean, you can have a couple of thoughts on this training. My thought is, the first one that comes to mind is always this: look, I can train you to do a job. If it was to cook burgers and fries and things like that, I can train you to do that, to cook in general. I can train you and show you how to do that. There may be many different ways of cooking and doing it and preparing the meal, but I can train you to do it. Now, what you do after I train you is sort of on your own. And a lot of times, what happens is in the heat of battle, there's a feeling that you have to react instead of go by what your training is telling you to do. So, if training can solve that problem, then that would be terrific. However, I think when we talk about training, a lot of times it comes down to being able to communicate better, being able to be more apathetic to the situations that you run into, being able to see a dangerous situation from a non dangerous situation and not always run into the fire thinking that everything is burning down. It's knowing, using a lot of more common sense than anything. And how do you train someone sort of on common sense? And remember, we get a lot of our officers from law enforcement or for law enforcement from the military. And that's the training that they have had. And these guys, it's not like they've even been in the military for 10 years, 12 years. It's 4 years, 2 years. And now they're becoming police officers and
But
still
they,
have no degree. or anything like that, never taken psych training, but they have a soldier mentality.
But not everyone who is a law enforcement officer is someone who is a soldier.
True.
So there are plenty of law enforcement officers who are not soldiers, who have not had the training that soldiers have had. But it is also the
For that, yeah,
mindset of the higher ups in the organization. If the mindset is that this is a war, what we do,
right.
even though our motto is to serve and protect, there is a group of citizens out there that we do not serve and protect. They actually are our enemy. So if there is the mindset that you must treat citizens as an enemy, you are going to continue to see this kind of behavior from law enforcement officers.
And that's true. And that's what I mean by a mindset. Many do come from the military, though, and
But not all. So
not.
let
No,
me
I'm
be
not
clear,
saying.
because
I
I
never
can't
said
let
all.
you, I
I
can't let
never
you,
said all.
but it
I
seems
said
like you're saying
many.
because they come from the military, that causes that mindset. That's not
No, no, no.
so because I don't want to let you disparage my fellow veterans.
Oh, I won't.
I will not. We
I won't.
we love
What I'm
and need
saying.
our veterans.
Well, watch.
It is the mindset of that organization and how they are allowed and encouraged to treat citizens.
Aha. Now, see, that's exactly what I'm talking about. There is a mindset that also comes from a soldier mentality. They come from one soldier mentality of protect each other to another on the streets of protect each other. And it's that
Um,
kind of mentality. The
we,
use of weapons,
we
the
will
use
just
of force.
we will just agree to disagree on that point, because as a former military person, I did not have that mindset. If I had become a law enforcement officer, I would not have had that mindset. So I'm not going to blame it on military training. It is again, what is allowed in that organization. Now, it may not be the formal motto of that organization, but if the inside um, analysis of that organization is that these people live in a certain area, they're garbage, they're trash, we can treat them any sort of way that we want to, that is what causes the mindset to think, I can treat this person that way, along with racism. And we can try and ignore that in our society, or we can deal with it. Racism plays an impact in how officers interact with, they see an African American person that they have to interact with versus when they see someone that looks similar to them.
Now, when you say, and this is the part that I love, Carm, because watch, you have just told me about you don't want to think that military training, okay, influences officers, right? But what you do have to admit is that the use of weaponry, when you have military training, that's something that's very used to you used to doing is firing weapons. You're going from one club atmosphere to another club atmosphere, and that you granted, saying that it's an atmosphere higher ups on down. But remember, the higher ups started also down below, probably some military training. Now, what I mean by the military training is every you save each other. It is us versus them. In every war, even the most recent ones, it's been a us versus them. Sometimes you don't know who the enemy is and how they're going to strike at you. So you have to be ready for everybody. And when you're walking the streets, just like when you're walking the streets of Mogadishu or some other country, the soldiers have to be ready to react at any time. It is a soldier mentality in war. Now, I'm just saying that's exactly what you describe when you say when they march down our streets and they can indiscriminately, I want you, busting this door, busting this out, recklessly shoot people
I didn't say they march down our streets. I said
into our
they come into
neighborhoods
the
and they
neighborhoods.
do damage.
That
And
is
I'm
true.
saying
But
that's
I just
exactly what they
we're
do
gonna
in
have to
war.
just disagree on
Oh,
that point,
sure.
because I'm not. going to allow any blame to be placed on military training. I think it is a greater problem of racism than it is any military training that causes the issue. Because if it were just military training
Yep.
that caused the issue, you would expect to see the same outcomes across the board, whether the person they were
Yes.
interacting with looked like the officer or whether it was an African American
Black
person, and you
officers
do
do the
not see
same
that.
thing that white officers do.
Correct.
That's why the racism, I say, is not on the surface. If anything, it's down below, but it's the training, it's the showing of power that
We
has to
live
be
in
done.
America.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, people can be racist against people that look like them.
Of course
The
they
African
are.
Americans have a very unique experience
That's
here
right.
in the United States that no other group
Yes.
has. And
I
so
totally
the
agree.
mere fact that there was an African American officer who was present when an African American citizen was mistreated, or that an African American officer was the person
That's
who
right.
did the mistreatment,
That's right.
does not mean that it is not the fault of racism. Racism has done a horrible number on this country
True.
and on African Americans
I'm
in the
not
way
denying that.
that African Americans can view each other.
I'm not denying that. However, that component I would just view it as somewhat secondary because it grows within the organization, you see. So, all right, but nevertheless, so back to the bottom line is, look, yes, maybe Biden was kowtowing, was kind of letting everybody know that's not his position and things like that for sure. But we're gonna have to see what kind of funding is actually going to change things, you see. So that's the thing that has to come out of that, is what kind of change is going to come with more funding. Now, when you talk about racial disparity, racial treatment, you would think, it's isolated in certain areas, but it's everywhere. In fact, last night on the Daily Show, they talked about the racial issues that are occurring in Ukraine, even now, about how African people who want to get out of the country are not being allowed out, but the Ukrainians are. How they're being forced to stay behind, they're being somewhat touched and beaten upon to stay behind. And one guy reporting that they wanted him to fight for them. But the overall thing was they're not letting the black people leave the country as easily as the Ukrainians. And what was it? It was the Bulgaria's president who talked about these refugees, because a while back, Syrian refugees tried to go to Europe and nobody wanted to take them. And the Bulgarian president talked about how, well, these refugees from Ukraine are good refugees, right? The ones we want to see who can mix into our societies. They are the individuals that we want, as because they are professional, they are smart, they can mix into our society and add to it. These individuals from Syria and North Africa are not the refugees we want. Now, countries can decide on, I guess, who can come in and who can come out. But that kind of thing now being practiced in the Ukraine in a crisis situation for individuals who are not Ukrainian citizens, who just want to get out of there, like American citizens who, like Sean Penn, apparently just walks across the border to Poland, just because he wanted out. Now, he wasn't a Ukrainian citizen or anything like that and just wanted out. And what we're talking about is students and workers and things like that who want out to back to their country. But if they're black, they're not being allowed. So it seems on every time we turn around on all scales in the world, this racial injustice, this racism tends to seep in. And it was the Bulgarian president's words that really are striking of what immigrants are good immigrants.
Because these people, I believe he said, are European. They are intelligent and hardworking. The and of course we did not see every African who was trying to leave Ukraine.
Right.
Um, but a number of the ones that we saw were students. They were people who
Right.
are in college in Ukraine. So, how he made that assessment, other than to say, he might as well have said, we will take white people into our country, any other
Right.
people
No.
fleeing horrible
Right. The
circumstances,
same
you cannot
circumstance.
come.
Fleeing the same
A war.
circumstance. Right. They're not even citizens of the country. And they want out. So, this racism thing, it can fly around the world. And it is around the world. And it's something that we actually will never forget. We can't ever sweep it under the rug. And we always got to talk about it when it raises its ugly head. Um, it's not going to stop. We're not going to stop it. We're going to have to learn to deal with it and live with it. And that's our task. And that's a tough task to take. And one of the first ways that we can take on that task is by making sure we're registered to vote and making sure that we do vote, making sure that we do not allow laws that restrict our voting rights. It is one of the top things that we can preserve and we can keep here, and we have to keep it. It was a beautiful tool back in Reconstruction and getting African Americans in Congress and getting them voted to city councils and all over. And it's a tool today.
Now, I would like to say, CC Badger, we thank you. We appreciate you being here with us every Friday. Now, normally, Lawman will give us a little tidbit of information, but tonight, accolades go to Lawman. Lawman has pulled off a feat that attorneys pray for, and he has saved a life. Sometimes being a criminal defense attorney means exactly that. Someone who is faced with murder charges, who is faced with the possibility of spending the rest of their lives potentially in state prison. And Lawman recently completed a trial where a young man was accused of 2 murders. And Lawman reached that jury and got them to see that the correct and right verdict was not guilty to all charges. That young man has his life back as a result of Lawman. If you are facing a criminal case that involves anything, this is the man to come to. This is the man to go to before you come anywhere near me. This is my mentor. I can't snatch the pebble from his hand. I have been trying, I can't do it. This is the master. Let that be clear. If you want to reach him, his office number is 916 443.
5600.
There it is.
You look, all grace to God. I mean, I'm put here on this planet for certain things. And that's how I look at it is whatever I do, God allow me to do it.
So let's let him know he's trying to sneak out of here and retire, and I'm trying to stop it. We need him. Our community needs him to keep fighting that fight.
I'll be there.
Our time is apparently up, Lawman, and we have numerous comments from
Thank you,
CC
CC.
Badger saying congratulations and that you're awesome. And thanking God. Yes, Lord. We agree
Yes.
with that assessment. He put this man here for a purpose, and this man has fulfilled that purpose. I'm still trying to get there.
That's why I'm trying to
He
retire.
has fulfilled that purpose, but we still need him. We still need him because there are so many more other young men out there facing similar circumstances.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And especially people in our community.
Yes.
And so that's why, it's up to us to look back and grab a life when we can.
Yes.
And try to change it the best you can.
So again, it's Friday. We've completed the end of our show. We thank those of you who were viewers.
Yes.
let others know that they can
Yes.
watch the episodes. They don't have to be here with us live. We
Right.
appreciate those that are here live. And CC Badger says, to God be the glory. He did the right thing with this one. Amen. All right. We're going to end for tonight. We are here every Friday at 6
6 o'clock.
p.m. Courtside with Lawman.
And Carmen B. Thank you, everyone.
Have a
Stay
good
safe,
evening.
please.
Yes.